Hello. All right. Welcome. This is the Frontiers in DeSci panel. Today we're going to talk a little bit about We're going to talk a little bit today about what DeSci is. All the speakers are going to have a chance to introduce themselves, and then hopefully just have a really nice conversation, and I would love to spend a ton of time on questions towards the end. So yeah, let's just get started and jump into introductions. So Aaron, if you'd like to go first, we'll just run down the way, who you are, what do you do, and what are you excited about in this space for?
Hello, I'm Erin McGinnis. I'm the community manager at Molecule, where we've developed a technology called IP NFTs, where intellectual property from a research lab is wrapped in a NFT smart contract layer, really kind of trying to advance different scientific funding mechanisms and expand what research looks like in that space. Then I'm also helping a bit on the program management side, as well as community and marketing at BioXYZ, which is a BioDAO accelerator. So really trying to help create and support the development of new BioDAOs and biotech organizations within blockchain and Web3. So excited to be here and dive into this conversation today.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Gennaro Durso. I'm a scientist for several decades and started a company about 10 years ago in the biotech world. And I'm not big pharma, so I'm small pharma, and I did it without venture capital. And so I'm sort of the next stage, if you will. I've worked for many, many years on research, but now I'm actually trying to solve problems more directly. And our biggest one right now is going after something to protect us from the next pandemic. Using oral drugs that we discovered in the past 2 years. That's a process, as you can imagine. We don't want to go to big pharma to do it. So the idea that came up was to kind of bridge that concept to a DAO. And that happened about a year ago when I was at this conference. And since that time, it's sort of exploded in a way. And now I think we have decent models for bridging a for-profit, centralized, I'll say the dirty word, centralized for-profit company to a decentralized DAO in order to actually move the ball forward and get these things we need, because there's no industry incentive to do so. So that's where I'm coming from, and I'm sort of like in the middle there of science and actual application of science to the point where you actually deliver a drug.
Hi guys, I'm Savo Koutamilidis. I'm from Crowdfunded Cures. My background is I'm an IP lawyer, commercial lawyer, and a patent attorney. I really focused on the issue around intellectual property in science, and particularly medicine. So very similar to what Gennaro is doing with PharmaDAO. We're very interested in looking at areas where medicines are not profitable, and they could be very, very effective. So, you know, everyone knows about hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin and all that sort of thing. Well, there's actually a drug that can protect against COVID. It's called fluvoxamine, very effective, but there's no money in producing it and doing the clinical trials. So we're basically trying to do like almost like a bounty, or what they call an impact market for open source medicine. But that's just a bit of a background. Thanks.
Hi everyone, my name is Elijah. I go by Flow Science and Web3. My background is as a molecular biologist, trained in genomics, biochemistry, and after finishing up grad school, started a biotech lab in my garage. Went on to do that for about 6 years, doing diagnostic testing for the cannabis industry, developed an ancestry test for the cannabis plant itself, which led to building out a data DAO, Cannabis Genome DAO, which we launched a little over a year ago, got funding from Near Foundation, basically a DAO-governed data marketplace. Ended up moving full-time into Web3. I am now operations and community lead for MedDAO, Distributed Medical Knowledge Network. And also now we've basically turned that diagnostic lab into a DAO as well, where we're teaching virtual courses, in real life courses, we're calling it In Real Lab, and renting out the space to people that want to sort of fund their own research through teaching and through partnership with the DAO itself. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And certainly not least, Kat from VitaDAO. Hi, Kat.
Hi, sorry, it took me a little bit longer to get here. But I'm Kat, I'm a core member at VitaDAO. We're introducing our DAO, I'm guessing. Okay. Okay, so VitaDAO, we use crypto to fund longevity research. Longevity is research that will expand your maximum health span or lifespan. And so far, we've funded around like 15 research projects. We partnered with a bunch of real world universities, but not to say crypto is not real world. We have also experimented with like IP NFT, like putting intellectual property as an NFT on chain, and then with Molecule, we experimented with fractionalization. We also have like many contributors that are members at universities. We have Pfizer Ventures, all very active in our deal flow working group, and yeah, that's about it.
Awesome. Great. So I am going to, just by show of hands, like 10 being I'm in DeSci, I'm building a DAO, I'm an expert. 1 being who the fuck are you people? Do like 10, 1, 5? Like how do people feel about DeSci? What do we know about DeSci? So we got some like 5s. That's great. That's some eager beavers right there. That's a great number. Okay, so
Very niche.
Yes, it's very niche, right? We've got crypto bubble, and then we've got like DAO bubble, and then we've got like DeSci DAO bubble, even more so. So who's brave enough to try to tell everyone here what is DeSci in a very simple 1-minute explanation? I'm happy to do. But does anyone have a really great example or analogy they like to use that they feel has resonated?
I'll take a stab at that. So I think of DeSci as a way of essentially connecting the users of science with the producers of science, sort of how open source software has sort of connected the users of software with the developers, right? That's kind of how I view DeSci, and obviously there's a lot of different ways it gets into that, and I'll let others sort of touch on that, but that's my one-liner.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I'll be the one sort of on the outside here stepping in a little bit, but being a scientist actually and have some experience in that world. And it is funded pretty heavily, in the world of science and government DAOs, right, is the way I think about it. But I think it's important to understand what the mission of a DAO is. That's like number one, right? Like if you form a community, and if it's longevity, fantastic. And if that's the goal of that DAO, then you want to do the best things possible to achieve the goals of the DAO. So when it comes to science and research, I can tell you from experience, it's complicated. There's a lot of research being done on longevity. My wife is part of that team and been doing it for decades. So it's not simple, right? I actually started grad school for longevity and aging because, when I was young, I wanted to live forever, right? But look at me, I'm getting older, right? And that's just sort of inevitable.
It's actually 175.
Exactly.
You look great, Gennaro.
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. I have a couple of drugs I use on the side, but the point is you got to decide what you really want to do. So when I went into this world of, let's say, DAOs, it was really not about science per se, but how do you go to the next step? How do you actually achieve the goals that you want for that DAO? In my case, it's bringing essential medications to people that need them around the world to save them from dying from a pandemic. To me, that's a pretty good goal. And we actually have drugs, as Sava just mentioned. One of the drugs we identified was fluoxamine, which was tested with my partner in Brazil and showed a reduction in mortality and hospitalizations. No one's talking about that. It was a big trial, and it made a lot of headlines. But when we went to the FDA, they said, oh, you didn't do it quite well enough to get FDA approval for that. So it's a real catch-22, and we need funding, obviously, to bring it up to a different level. And that's where DAOs come in. So it's about how badly do we want to protect ourselves from a lockdown the next time around? Do we care enough as a community? Because the industry won't care, that's for sure. They'll care about making a vaccine a year and a half after many people die, 8 million and counting, right? That's what's going on. So for me, DeSci or D-pharmaceuticals, or whatever you want to call it, it's about solving problems and doing it with the power of the people and people before profit, kind of the concept. So that's where I come into this discussion, I guess, as a little bit on the outside of DeSci, but a guy that has some experience in that world.
I can just come up with a really quick one, but basically around a lot of crypto now, it's about incentive alignment and solving coordination problems. And with scientists, as a young scientist, I mean, I did science growing up. I was much better. I'm a pretty bad lawyer. I was much better as a scientist, but I realized being a lawyer is going to be a lot more, well, just makes more sense. But like as a scientist, your options are you can either do the academic track and essentially wait till you're like 40 plus in order before you get your first grant, and that's like 500 grand from NIH, and then basically you've got to pay for like 3 postdocs, or you can go into kind of the dark side of big pharma, and everyone kind of knows what the problem is there. They're all focused on, 2/3 of the drugs that come out of FDA approval don't actually work any better than generic drugs. So there's this real incentive misalignment problem. There's also about publications, the top publications you actually pay to publish in these magazines, and they never run out of their trademarks never run out, and they're just totally extractive. So we're talking about creating like a regenerative system that funds scientists that sort of flourishes, because actually scientists are the people, and engineers, but mainly scientists, are the ones kind of discovering all the new knowledge. And so we, there's so many problems that can be solved. And yeah, crypto and DeSci is about like trying to make an attempt for us to solve those problems together.
So for me, DeSci and really all of Web3 as a whole is much more of a social movement that's enabled by different technologies, and a bit of a mental shift of how can we reimagine what incentive mechanisms look like? How can we reimagine what knowledge sharing or publications look like? How can we reimagine what a career trajectory for a scientist looks like, and also give power to all of those different parties involved, particularly the people who are most affected by it, which in my mind are the scientists who this is their potentially entire life's work, as well as patient populations, people who receive that end result, and giving them a say as well as some sense of ownership in what the future of potentially their life could look like, and the solutions that might be most viable for their situation. So in my mind, DeSci is building off of a lot of the work that's been done in open science movements, taking the best parts of things that work in traditional institutional science, as well as what works in a more open type of framework as well, and joining it together in collective ways.
I feel like I have to say something because everyone said something. But I don't know if I have a definition of DeSci as much as like just echoing what was said here about how you kind of have to have like a thesis, like a theory of change, and a way that you want to approach that. Because if you take longevity, what we do, for example, when the goal is to have an intervention in longevity, or something that people can use to extend their health span or lifespan. And if you take big pharma, drug development is like each individual one is like a several billion business. Like we don't have several billions in the DAO space, much less in the DeSci space. So how do we actually make a difference? What is the change here? And we do have a thesis about that. And when you like bring that to the community, like people see like the scientific community. What is surprising to me that they are very receptive to crypto. Everyone here is probably used to this experience of talking to people outside of crypto and receive a lot of like skeptical look at best, or like downright contempt at worst. But scientists are very open about this. The NIH is very open about this. They have a proposal right now about, a call for proposal about like new experimental governance structure for funding to be implemented in 2025. But still, that's very fast for government. And so it kind of feel like we are at this shelling point where we're moving towards the same experimentation of new things to do in science.
Yeah, I love that. I think all of those hit on different things that I certainly identify with: the community movement, social movement, new career paths for scientists, new business opportunities, new funding models for scientists. Yeah, I'm very excited about DeSci. So I think we kind of know what DeSci is. We kind of know who's on the stage. We have some very interesting people up here. We have some actual scientists who have kind of have come to the crypto universe. We have some IP lawyers up here, some founders, some excellent fundraisers and community strategists. So we could talk about a lot of different things. This is the frontiers of DeSci, so we're mostly future focused. So with that in mind, I think most people probably have a decent understanding of the different problems we're talking about solving. Gennaro, you mentioned a few of them, like publication, scientific funding, peer review, like all these problems. What do the next 10 years look like in DeSci to make it actually successful? Like, all these things sound great. I would love to be able to do a postdoc at a DAO and like get paid for it, have benefits, and like, maybe I'll publish with the Journal of Decentralized Work at Talent DAO someday, and that'll be peer reviewed, and that'll actually have like help my career and like have an impact factor. Like, I would love for those things to happen. How do they happen?
I'm going to paint a picture. It's a little different at
Yes.
DeSci, but then somebody from DeSci can say what 10 years will look like for DeSci. But here's an actual precedent for what I envision will happen for discovery of a drug to save lives. Number one, how many of you would give $100 to have saved people's lives during the pandemic? Okay, all of you, presumably. I certainly would have. So let's say 100 million people gave $100. We'd have $10 billion in the treasury. Now let's say we have a drug that we want to take to clinical trial that can help us protect us from the pandemic. This already happened, by the way. A different disease, but the same thing. And we succeed with, let's say, 200 million. And we get back 3 billion into the DAO. And you say, how in the world did that happen? Well, Cystic Fibrosis Foundation raised $250 million 20 years ago. I knew the team. Bob Beal led it. And with that money, they funded the creation from discovery all the way to marketable material for cystic fibrosis. And the foundation got 10% royalty back. They ended up with a check for $3.5 billion. And if you don't believe me, go look it up. It's public information. They now have $5 billion in their bank account. And I honestly don't think they know what to do with it, because they're restricted on what they can do with that money, because it's cystic fibrosis money. Why didn't they give it to the patients? Why didn't they lower the cost of the drug? Because they lost control of the drug to the centralized company, which became a $27 billion company overnight, from failure to $27 billion on one drug. Imagine a DAO having some rights to what the pricing of that drug would be, where it would go, who could use it. Do we really need to have a $27 billion company selling one drug? Do we need Pfizer making $38 billion net on a vaccine that could have been owned by a DAO through a separate entity? I think not. So this is the 10 years I'm projecting. 10 years from now, we're going to find drugs to save lives, and a DAO is going to be supplemented for that through a royalty program, and no individual member of the DAO will get a penny. It'll be a community gaining the value. That DAO now has more money in it, like cystic fibrosis. And now we vote to where we put it to build another drug for another disease or save another problem in the world. But putting the power in the people's hands on large treasuries through a DAO structure makes sense to me. Sorry, I didn't make too much time, but that's important that people realize that's the true power of DAOs.
Something that I would say that is perhaps that's an amazing model. Like, if we can leverage the existing model that Big Pharma use and basically take that to non-profits or to community-owned organizations, that's an amazing outcome. However, you are still charging very, very high prices for things to the end user ultimately. And what I'm even more excited about is like using the frameworks like Molecule have and VitaDAO are using these IP and FT frameworks, which allow us to then invest. Imagine if we could invest in like a diet. Imagine if ketogenic diet could treat cancer better than the most expensive drugs, and there's a lot of science behind that. Ketogenic diet, your cancer cells take 10 times as much sugar as normal cells. if you go into ketosis, you're just burning fat cells that starves the cancer. So if this was a drug, if I took this to somebody as a drug, I would make my $30 billion. I would have a $30 billion company. But because it's diet, there's nothing to be made because of the incentive structures. So if we can fix those incentives through these bounties, through pay for success contracts, things like that, basically like a prize, we can unlock a lot of value for society, and just that's been previously untapped, and particularly off-patent drugs repurposing. So that's the bit that I'm most excited about, is that we can make medicine about medicine and less about just selling the most expensive drugs that we can, and 2/3 of them don't end up working after a while. Oh, yeah.
Just one little comeback to that a little bit. The point was, there's huge potential to make this kind of money, but you don't have to. A Dow won't care about making $3 billion on one drug. So now we can sell it for a lot less and get it around the world where it's needed. And we make a small profit, and we put some of that back to the Dow to sustain it. But it puts it in the hands of the people to decide how that's done, rather than just big corporations that say, hey, we can sell this for whatever we want because it's a life and death matter, and we own the patent, so we can control it. And that's the problem, that they have the control over how you use those drugs. What he's saying is we can find cheaper alternatives that don't need to be super expensive. And I think we're in agreement there.
Yeah, and I think that we're kind of going back between the concept of IP and funding. And it's like the chicken and the egg, right? How are we going to generate the IP without the funding? Are we going to decentralize one or the other, or both? And obviously it's both, I think, is the answer what DeSci is doing. But DeSci right now, in terms of the funding going to DeSci projects, I think the biggest raise in DeSci was Molecule, right? That $13 million round. And compared to traditional biotech, that is a drop in the bucket. So yeah, the things that are coming out of DeSci already, the potential applications, right? One drug gets to market, one drug finds a new application, which I don't even understand the potential impact of all that stuff. So yeah, that IP though, that ownership of that IP, I think is really one of those main fundamental things that we can get to quickly and have huge impact in terms of what the future of DeSci is, right?
Yeah, we definitely share the vision of intellectual property and how you commercialize, decentralized commercialization of IP. One thing I would say about that, and maybe also a bit of a pivot, is that it's not difficult for the technology to happen. We already have IP NFT. We already have fractionalization. You got to figure out this is more a social engineering problem, and in the spirit of decentralizing and also a social problem, you need more people to work on it. So my vision of DeSci really, whatever it is, I think we need to bring more people on board. And I'm a little bit biased here because I do scientist onboarding at Vita now. Web3 is not very friendly to anyone really, let alone scientists. So that needs to be done. It needs to be fixed. And then we have scientists are not really doing, very few of them are doing anything productive, and there's the brain drain into industry. I went to MIT, I saw so many of my friends who are brilliant, and they wanted to be bioengineers, material engineers. Once they graduate, the only place that they can go is where Google or Twitter, because that's where the money is. And even if they stay in industry, they don't really have the academic freedom to pursue whatever it is they want, right? And so there's a big opportunity here to bring people into DeSci and to create a space where we could really decentralize science, and then everything else, I think, would just fall into place.
Yeah, I'd really love to emphasize Kat's point a bit about how the future of what DeSci looks like at a tangible, everyday, me and you type of level. I think we'll have a massive influx of citizen scientists where we're contributing to the knowledge sets and the advancement of research of things we care about. For instance, one of the DAOs in BioXYZ right now is focused on hair loss. That's a super under-researched area, and lots of people are doing self-experimentation there. So by expanding the opportunity for scientists to really specialize in on what their domain expertise is and what they excel at, as well as individuals to contribute their own personal experiences and knowledge sets. We'll be able to explore more of the fringes and come up with solutions that I think are a lot more innovative and actually impactful on the end users and people.
I love the direction this panel took this when I asked this question. It's like, what is the future? What should we be thinking about? And to me, it's onboarding, building community, right? It's figuring out IP and incentive systems. And for me, like that's like the most important part. Like with Talent DAO, like we have a community of open science citizen scientists, and like how do we pay them? How do we incentivize them? How do we monetize their IP for them? Help them like open source knowledge, but also build their reputation. Because at the end of the day, like if you're doing research, like publish or perish on the blockchain, publish or perish in Nature, like it's gonna be the same game. But what do the incentive structures look like that for that? We could spend a ton of time there. I'm really tempted to ask a question, Sava, on like what's your take on the future of IP monetization that we haven't done yet? Maybe we can talk a little bit about that after. I'm gonna open it up for Q&A actually though. Just because we do have about 10 minutes left, and then maybe we can jump back into the incentive stuff so we have time. So are there any questions about decentralized science, building DAOs, onboarding scientists, anything? Yes?
So, I can project.
You can project? Well, I'm projecting to you.
Okay, thank you. So I am a DAO optimist, but I'm also a little skeptical, particularly when it comes to science, because there's such a high upfront initial cost you have to clear to engage in like proper science in terms of having like the lab and the materials and capturing data sets and being able to analyze it and then punt that out to peers and then don't get me started about the whole academic journal ecosystem and how do you infiltrate that? Will they take DAO seriously? So there's a reason why it happens inside corporations, because that as a vehicle is highly efficient at delivering what's necessary to get started in this. How do DAOs do that? When we say citizen scientists, well, I mean, like I consider myself a scientist because I take in data and then conduct hypotheses and experiments and evaluations. But how does someone, you can't scale that. Like not everyone can afford a lab. So can a DAO build a couple micro labs around the world or create some sort of joint venture where citizen scientists can come in and at least participate in shared resources to conduct their science? Like how does that happen? Talk me through that.
I'd love to take that one. Yes, exactly. So, hey, you can start a lab for cheap. eBay is wonderful. And I did that in my garage. And we moved into a commercial space in 2019. And now we're doing exactly that, renting out the space to researchers who want to use it for a day, a week, a month. And essentially, when they participate and do that, they can elect to, basically share their IP with the DAO or to own it themselves, right? There's no IP restrictions. It's not like working at a university or a company where you're restricted, right? When I was starting my own lab, I had to get all my tech transferred out of the university, even though I did my research at home, because I was still affiliated with that institution. So depending on affiliations, they may not be able to use something like that, like you're suggesting, even sort of a decentralized governed lab. But that's kind of the restriction, I think, is that traditional institutions do have a lot of sway over the researchers themselves.
Yep.
Yeah. So last year, 1 year ago, Mark Cuban sat on a stage. I don't know if any of you were here, but he said, DAOs are really interesting models. Where's the revenue? And I thought it was an incredibly powerful statement. And I was in the audience screaming, I got revenue. So the bottom line is, yes, you're right. I've done science for 4 decades. It's bloody expensive. $2 million, $3 million grants last you about 3-4 years. And you get a couple of papers out and there's nothing else. There's no patents because you can't patent genes. So it's really difficult. You're not a drug discovery research lab. So that's when I made the transition to a for-profit, which is the most efficient system for getting something done. And if I fail at it, I fail at it. It's a really easy measure. I don't have money to pay my employees and my rent, and I'm out. But I didn't do that. I hustled and sold my service that I had developed over 2 decades. And it won. I was able to sell it, getting revenue and profits, which allowed me to build a profitable company that found a drug for the pandemic with 7 people. And now I'm saying, I don't have venture capital. I did it with revenue. So I'm offering a DAO an opportunity to scale this to another level and get a reward for it in the community. That's it. It's very simple. A DAO is a wallet with a purpose, and the only way to solve the purpose is to use the most efficient means to do it, which is for-profit centralized companies, typically small, not venture-backed, that have brilliant revenue streams. All they need to do is scale. I represent that model, but I would love to see 20 more companies with exactly that model. But you know what? It takes a lot of work and 10 years typically to build a company that's profitable. But what Mark Cuban was probably saying is go out and build a company and then see if a DAO would support that company's purpose. And later this afternoon, I'll be talking about a very bold idea where we go beyond pharma and talk about the things we really need to keep people alive on this planet. So if you want to check in, but it'd be interesting to discuss with everyone here these concepts.
Just really quickly, I won't be long. So the thing with pharma is that, you can have companies that, as Gennaro was saying, are worth $27 billion pretty much overnight. So there's so much money to be made, and it's so inefficient. And what crypto does is basically it democratizes access to capital, right? People raise $50 million to buy a copy of the Constitution, just something ridiculous based on memes. With $50 million, we could take ketamine and get FDA approval for ketamine to treat depression. Ketamine at the moment is $2 a dose, and there's something called S-ketamine, which is worse than ketamine for depression, and it's $850 a dose. So we can save billions and billions of dollars for $50 million. So but there's just an incentive misalignment. But what crypto does is it basically democratizes access to that capital. You can IPO basically, overnight or whatever, essentially. So yeah, it's a bit of regulatory arbitrage, but yeah, I think there's a lot of money to be made, particularly around pharma and DeSci. I think there's a really strong business model and can pay for a lot of labs run out of people's garages and stuff.
Like bring it a little bit closer to the original question. So at the average investment size that we give out at VitaDAO is around 200K. So if you think about it, it's like a lot of money, but it's not quite like a prohibitive amount of money, like for someone to start doing research. And on the one hand, like we look at drug development, like you need several billions. On the other hand, like this is 200K to fund the research. So when we do things ourselves, like there's a lot of costs that you can cut. I'm not sure exactly where. It looks like the traditional science is very bloated, but so like you can do quite a lot of things, and there are new structures that help cut down the cost. Like you have CRO, like contract research organizations, so that you don't have to spin up your own lab. You can just like do the science. And from a skills perspective too, speaking from a pharma, like biotech perspective, like biotech companies needs operators. So like they need people to do marketing, people to develop software. So I would say like even if you don't have the capital or the skills to be in science at the moment, there's still a lot you can do.
All right, Aaron, I definitely want to give you some space to stop. This will be our last question though. We're a little bit over. I love talking about this stuff. Sorry, not sorry. Please.
Yeah, I just wanted to provide a few different examples of things being done right now. So supported by VitaDAO and a handful of other organizations as well is something called the Longevity Prize, and that's focused on these micro grants to just kind of increase the funnel of flow of different potential research opportunities and just make that first step forward for somebody interested in conducting research a bit easier, and doing that kind of across the entire globe. I've recently been talking with a good handful of different researchers who were funded through VitaDAO IP NFTs, and one of their biggest reasons of why they like this model and going the IP NFT route is due to the feedback mechanisms. So citizen scientists can also be contributing to the feedback of a researcher's proposal of research they're suggesting to do. So as an individual, I might have some science domain in that area, but I'm not looking to open up an entire lab, but I could provide some feedback on their proposal that can make it way more efficient. And just having those feedback mechanisms is another way people are able to get involved. At Talent DAO, for instance, within the research guilds, there are a ton of people who don't have like a formal educational research training, and they're being trained in scientific methodology by being part of these research guilds. And the distribution of people within Talent DAO is super globally oriented, so it's also increasing diversity of thought, which will just enhance kind of this whole space. So there are a ton of other examples and mechanisms as well that I think everyone up here can speak to. So would invite anyone who's interested to reach out, even if you're just curious. The space right now is really, really friendly, so come join us.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you so much. If you have any questions for me or the speakers, we love talking about this stuff, and I'm sure there's a lot we wanted to talk about more. And we all have amazing projects we would also like to shill, so please come say hello. Thanks, everyone.